Transportation and Transit Commission meeting is now called to order. First item on the agenda is the approval of the January minutes. Did everyone have a chance to review the minutes? I don't hear any no's, so would someone like to make a motion to approve the January minutes?
I'll move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Went too fast there. Okay, no opposition. Okay, the January minutes are approved. Public appearances for non-agenda items. I did not receive no one contacted me that wanted to comment on anything on tonight's meeting. Andrew, did you receive anything?
Did not.
Okay, so I think we're good there. Next agenda item is the proposed alternate side parking ordinance changes. I'll refer back to Andrew for some background on that.
Awesome. Good evening, everybody. So I will share my screen. Let me know if you guys can see that. Awesome. So let's just scroll down. So the memo I sent you guys, I know you haven't had a ton of time to review it. This kind of outlines kind of what our existing operations is for snow plowing and for alternative side parking, and kind of how that is working, how that's not working, and then a proposed ordinance change. This is very draft, so this isn't we're not voting or anything, but I want to make sure I got some feedback before we worked through some of the details and got this polished up to submit to you guys, so, and the council. So I can just kind of run through it real fast if that's helpful for you. So we currently have two ordinances on the books, one for snow emergencies, one for alternate side parking. So alternate side parking is pervasive throughout the city. There's no exclusions to that. And I kind of laid out our snow and ice policy in that link, and then kind of where our snow plows go right now. And we primarily use 14-foot plows, which clear at one travel lane. We do have a 1-ton truck with a 10-foot plow, clearing a smaller path for some of our tighter spots. You can kind of see that on the map if I zoom in, in some of the areas that we'll be talking about, potentially going to potentially relaxing alternate side parking. And so currently, we have pretty good compliance, but in highly parked up areas, that being new developments and some developments to the north, where we have higher than 50% of our parking occupancy filled, people have a hard time finding another place to park. Once you get past that 50% marker, you can't just all park on one side of the street or the other. Somebody has to find another spot. So in those places, our compliance is not as good as we'd like it to be, and the police, start in November when the ordinance takes effect, and start issuing tickets to try to train folks, but that only works up to a point. And then we still have areas of the city where compliance is very low when we need it, when we need folks to move. And so I kind of reviewed some other parking ordinances in neighboring cities. Madison is a good example, being, for a lot of our northern neighborhoods, that all of them are alternate side parking there, but in kind of the central city they have a relaxation of that, so that only during snow emergencies does that alternate side parking apply to those areas. I referenced Middleton, Stoughton, Sun Prairie, and Verona. Well, all have kind of different variants of this, a similar platform, but in some cases, Sun Prairie kind of focuses on snow routes, but then when they call a snow emergency, they prohibit all public parking. Stoughton does alternate side parking only during snow emergencies. We have some alternatives to daily alternate side parking, and so this kind of ratchets up or down. Either restricting overnight parking all times of year, which is what some communities do, or going down to alternate side parking only by petition, right? So there's kind of a scale of ordinances that exist in Wisconsin, and in Minnesota that, a lot of communities address this in one way or another, but they have lots of different variants on that. So I had some dimensionality because it's always helpful to kind of think about how does this play out? So winter precipitation, we're looking at, this year might be a little bit atypical, slightly atypical, but we're looking at 2 to 5, 5 snowstorms of 3 inches or more, and 2 snowstorms of 5 inches or more. Granted, we have accumulating snow, we have blowing snow, so there's a lot of kind of other dimensions there that could account for kind of increased maintenance versus the typical. And as things change, we might not ever see the average, right? It might be higher or lower each year. So, but yeah, parking utilization, I kind of just laid that out versus mobility, and then the duration of parking restrictions. Most of these restrictions go in effect between 10 p.m. First day to 8 a.m. the following day, with some variations of that either. But we currently have 1 a.m. to 7 a.m. And so I kind of laid out the pros and cons of either, having this be in effect all times or only when it's necessary. I mean, the real crux of the matter is, November 15th rolls around, there's no snow, and all of a sudden we're getting ticketed because people aren't moving their car. Is that unneeded or is that training? And that's kind of if we boil it down to that sort of kind of issue, are we getting better enforcement because we're kind of focusing on this in early season and building people's expectation, or is that kind of leading to an effect that by the time we actually need it, people aren't really moving their cars as much or as needed, or would it not matter either way? That's kind of the crux of the matter of how can we get better snow clearing operations. So we have a draft proposal right now, and what this would do would be revising both of our ordinances. It would extend, instead of 1 a.m. to 7 a.m., it would extend from 1 a.m. to 1 p.m. The justification behind that impetus would be that we focus first on our class 1, class 2 streets, our major roads. And by the time we get done with those, sometimes that's past 7. And so we get to the residential streets and start clearing them. And that's after the alternate side parking is in effect. So we're not really getting a lot of value out of that. So if we move to a 1 p.m., we could just increase that window of more time. We haven't thought of all the ramifications that might mean, so that's why we're here, to talk through what that might be. We would also be revising the snow and ice emergency ordinance to basically, so in this case, what we'd be doing is similar to Madison. We'd be setting up some zones where you could, we would relax the alternate side parking in highly dense parking areas. And we'd have those specifically laid out in ordinance. In medium to high density residential locations, we wouldn't enforce alternate side parking unless there's a snow emergency. And then in some places, we would also, when there's a snow emergency called, we will, with street widths less than 20 feet, we'll say that you cannot park there, and we would have signage applicable to that. And that's really just trying to make sure that we can get our plows through during those snow emergencies when we really need it clear. So this would be shifting more from a, every day across the whole city to we want to make sure we're really focusing on places to clear during the times we really need it. And so there'd be 3 different signs. We kind of walk through the associated benefits that we wouldn't need enforcement officers to be focusing on this, come November the 15th next year, or in 2021. And that, people would focus more on this when it matters, when we call the snow emergencies like other communities do. And so we'd have 3 signs. We kind of have a rough estimate of how many signs we would need and their cost. So you would see that we would be changing the city boundary signs to more of what Madison looks like. I mean, this is an example. This wouldn't be the exact thing. But it would include that except snow emergency zones. Then for areas where we're going to only enforce alternate side parking during snow emergencies, we would add the second option. And then for places that are too tight, 20 feet or less during snow emergencies, we'd say no parking during snow emergencies. So I kind of outlined what the revised text would look like. It goes through just kind of what I described in specific detail. And then we do have some specific streets where we've started to lay this out, where we've kind of had problems in the past. I also have some others could include. And so this is really a discussion of where do we need this most. We certainly have a lot of knowledge from the ops crews, the drivers who know these streets and who know where they have trouble spots. But the residents, can also certainly weigh in. You guys can weigh in of areas that we know. And really, I just want to hear kind of what you guys think, pros and cons of a change like this, to both make sure the residents, can focus on moving their cars when it's necessary, and hopefully get some improved compliance. It's kind of an olive branch or compromise between, let's make sure we're only focusing on this when we need to, but let's make sure we really move our cars when that time comes. So with that, I kind of open it up for discussion.
This is Rich here. I have a couple points or questions.
Yeah.
In District 1, there's a lot of rental units. There's also places like, I think it's Harley, where literally every other house can be in the city of Madison or in Fitchburg.
Mm-hmm.
People in the rental, a lot of them don't know where they live. They really don't know that they're in Fitchburg or Madison. They just assume it's all one big place. You'll see that when they're putting their leaves out at the curb and wondering why they weren't vacuumed up. So I think I'd like to see us basically doing exactly what Madison is doing. It takes it easier on the top end on making decisions from here. Also, it's easier for the citizens to understand, what it is.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great point. Certainly consistency so that we can magnify kind of the communication channels that Madison's using, that we're all the same, and that, when people don't know if they're in Madison or Fitchburg, it's all consistent. That definitely makes sense. And to be fair, right now we are consistent with Madison in, outside the central core. So the 1 to 7. I think the reason we're bringing it up now is we have, we don't have that central core like Madison does that we could, specify this for. So we're kind of taking the same approach, but saying in places where we have higher density, let's do that same thing that Madison does. The timing, the 1 to 7 versus 1 to 1, that certainly is up for debate, and it would be nice for everybody to be consistent. But we were just kind of trying to find a way to improve operations that way. That seeing that the current way we're doing it, we sometimes don't get to some of those residential streets. So, yep, that's a very valid point. I definitely can appreciate that. Consistency is good.
Hi, this is Troy. I think that following Madison makes sense for their snow emergencies. When they declare, you have to move your car off the road and park off, if we go the same route, the TV stations, which are primarily, I would guess, what most people get their information from, tend to always mention Madison and sometimes mention the other jurisdictions. So if we just follow Madison, then I think we simplify a lot of communication problems.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And right now, just to clarify, there's some flexibility with how and when we call snow emergencies. Some jurisdictions say 3 inches or 4 inches. We would have some discretion over when that is called. So if Madison is calling it, then we could call that as well for consistency. Because the weather conditions are very similar, obviously.
And Andrew, I assume there was maybe feedback from the Public Works Department and the police on this, like what those specific streets that you mentioned and and the timing of this, is that?
Yeah. So we did talk to, the police department. yeah, there were certainly concerns of kind of how equitable some of the ticketing is. You know, we're primarily focused on places that have higher density, and certainly it never feels good to give somebody a ticket when there's no snow on the ground. But at the same time, we're conscious that if you don't do that to some degree, that it might feel like a surprise. Like, oh, I didn't know this existed. Like why is this only in effect 5 days out of the year? So there's kind of both sides of that. And yes, definitely, I talked to our street supervisor. He gave me a lot of great information about our plows and kind of how we do things and some of the trouble spots. Yeah. So, and yeah, I just want to reiterate that initially this was kind of the impetus was kind of brought on by some of our newer developments where we have these higher density parking areas. We want to make sure that we're being equitable across the city wherever we have kind of occupancy over 50%. We're making sure that we're focused on those areas, making sure that we're relaxing this for areas where people might not have another option. But we also want to be cognizant of, let's try to improve snow clearing operations, whatever we can do to work with the public to try to make sure we're doing this together and we can actually get the roads clear, because I know everyone wants that.
This is Troy again. I think that if the city could mail in November to all the addresses that have multiple units, very careful explanation as to what a snow emergency is and when it'd be invoked, and especially if you could follow the TV stations and that type of stuff, because multi-unit by definition have constant turnover. And if you may educate someone who's really good, and then a whole bunch of new people come in and they leave their car out, and then they're not happy. So I think if the city just, you wouldn't have to mail the whole city. You could mail just to units that have an apartment number, or however the city figures those things out. And I don't know how many apartment units there are in the city, but I think it would be good communication by the city to keep that high turnover area well informed. And my suggestion is to do it in mid-November.
Okay, yeah. That's helpful. Yeah, definitely there's an awareness component to this, and everything we can do to make sure that folks know that this ordinance is on the books, just like in Madison, and you need to move your car. Yep, that's very helpful. Any other questions or kind of clarifying points? Yeah.
Question for me. So in the revised ordinance that's listed here with the changes in red, can you clarify what the list of roads at the end of under C, can you clarify what it means when they're an exception to the winter parking? And then also explain how that roads.
And sorry, I should back up a little bit. So right now, just to make sure we're all on the same page, our alternate side parking ordinance is applicable for all city streets. So, I mean, except for streets that only have parking on one side, that gets a little bit trickier. But so it's even on even days, odd days. And this ordinance changing section 68-212 would create some exceptions to that ordinance, so that, for example, Chalet Gardens Court, the entire length, would only have to do alternate side parking during snow emergencies. So it would be a relaxation of the current ordinance for a subset of our city streets, to make sure that to focus on those that are have above 50% parking occupancy only when we absolutely need it. Similar to how Madison does it with downtown, where the proxy variable there is a higher density, higher occupancy or parking occupancy. So a similar logic applied to our streets, if that makes sense. And so these would be the exceptions to our general rule.
Okay, so on a normal day, they won't have to comply with the alternate side parking because of the nature of the area.
Exactly. And right now, the ordinance is only in effect from November 15th to March 15th. So during that time, right now, all these streets, technically, you're supposed to switch your car right now every other day. But because of low compliance, we're trying to switch things up and make sure we're focused on the times when we really need people to.
Got it. Yeah, I do like that change. I guess, I mean, Public Works probably weighed in on this, but I do wonder what effect that has on street sweeping. Because I know street sweeping in Fitchburg is challenging because we literally only have one street sweeper for the entire city at this moment in time. And because that schedule is inconsistent, I wonder how that will, and that's a separate question, but just something I wanted to.
No, that's a good point. And we noted that in here because, like the city of Madison, they do get some benefits in those, at least in November when the ordinance is in effect, but we don't have snow, that we can get a little bit better street sweeping operations. In talking briefly with our street supervisor, we weren't getting a ton of benefit from that. So, but we did note that's one kind of drawback of going to this model in those areas.
One question, if they don't get their cars off the street during a snow emergency, do they get a ticket?
So they certainly can. Typically we start in early, in November 15th at the beginning of the season to kind of enforce locations to try to make sure people are aware, giving warnings, giving tickets as necessary. We typically utilize the 48-hour rule more so than the alternate side parking. And so, if a car is parked for longer than 48 hours, we'll ticket and tow them to make sure that we can really get. But even in those cases, when you have 4 or 5 in a row, you really got to clear them all out because you can't get in between them. Right. So I would say, typically we utilize more of the 48-hour rule currently.
I was just wondering if perhaps, since you're relaxing it in those areas, they won't have the alternate side parking, to maybe, just put warnings on the cars. Because I don't know, mailing it to every single person, not everybody's got a car, and you really want to get the information to the people that has cars. It's just a thought that perhaps maybe you can't always predict the weather, but maybe the week beforehand, police could put warnings on people's cars to say, hey, you need to get them off during a snow emergency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks, Jason.
It seems like a balancing act between, we're talking about probably 5 to 10 days a year where we have a snow emergency on average, and trying to least convenience citizens, but also educate them at the same time. And I was amazed by how different the cities across Wisconsin all do this. I would have thought that, before looking at this, that was pretty consistent city to city, but definitely not, as you pointed out. So, people trying to remember, what the policy is and so forth, that's been suggested already, that can be challenging. Like you said, the balance between training somebody to park on the opposite sides when there's no snow for 2 months, we have a dry season, whatever, and then, boom, a snow event hits for the first time, and you have to educate everybody really fast. So I think it's a tough question. I think are you planning to get public feedback, like a public meeting on this?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think if that's kind of your guys' recommendation, I definitely think that could be a good next step. I know, that it'd be helpful to kind of understand how different neighborhoods can kind of perceive this. I know some other jurisdictions do more of a localized model that you would opt in or out based upon your street. That's more of an involved process, but I think we would want to go through some public outreach to understand how people would like to see this. And I will note that, I'm sorry, I forgot this, that, we did do a back of the napkin cost estimate, and we saw roughly 11 grand. So this is not insignificant. I do think the signage would help folks understand that there is an alternate, having more signs with alternate side parking would help in some ways get that message out. But it's not trivial. It's not trivial.
Question. So I saw after this conversation, at some point, you're going to prepare an ordinance for the council to act on. And so, I wouldn't guess that this will be in effect till next winter anyway, so.
That's right. Yeah, originally we were going to try to, get a testing period for like 2 weeks or so, but there's no way we would get any of the signs really out in force until next year's season.
And
So.
the cost, you mentioned the cost, $11,000. Is that the cost of the signs? Is that what you're talking about?
Signs, that does not include labor right now, so it'd be roughly $100 per sign, plus labor.
And I was curious, I assume these ordinances enforced by the police, do they have an opinion about, from an enforcement standpoint? Have you talked with the police department about that?
Yeah, I certainly have. I mean, yeah, it's that, we're not seeing great improvements in compliance through our enforcement efforts, I would say. So, I think that's kind of the general theme of what we're seeing right now, that what we're trying to do right now is not working great. So that's kind of where we came up with, let's try to do something new. What that new thing is, that's kind of what we're workshopping now.
Well, I suppose it wouldn't hurt to have some kind of formalized public input on this before it takes effect, and there's a lot of time to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's definitely true. And it'd be great to be talking about winter weather in July or something when, just remind everybody of what that's like. So that'd be great.
One thing that might be effective, because I really think it would be nice for the alders to have an opportunity to weigh in, given the fact that, they can think about it from each different aspect of the city prior to when we take a look at the ordinance. This might be a good topic for a committee of the whole meeting, so that can be some deeper discussion, and maybe it's both this and public transportation, since both of those are, issues that are going to need some weighing in and some deep thought. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up, and that's something you'll have to discuss with the council president about timing that, but I think that would be maybe a good opportunity to get this out there a little bit more.
Okay.
This is Rich again. I got one final question. You mentioned roads of 20 feet or less. What's the typical width of a residential road in Fitchburg?
I believe 32 is
32?
pretty typical. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other comments for Andrew or questions on the alternate side parking issue? If not, we'll move on to the next agenda item, upcoming transit meetings, public outreach. And I'll go back to Andrew for a briefing on that.
All right.
I think, was that on the last page of our packet?
Very good. So let me know if you guys can see this. Looks like it's coming up. Awesome. I just want to check in. We want to kind of have this be a consistent review item. And so you kind of see things crossed out that we've done. So just to kind of review that briefly. So, we talked about this last time. We kind of presented a memo of what information we had to date. We submitted a non-binding intent to pursue WISDOT operational funding in January. And then city staff did attend a Metro partner meeting. And that was very informative. We learned a little bit more kind of about what other jurisdictions are seeing as well. Metro was very gracious. The mayor kind of walked us through kind of what they're seeing on the federal assistance side. They had 24 million in spring 2020. They are getting a new round of 15 million in January, and so they're still kind of working out how that's going to play out. But the really good news is that that means that we'll likely be locked in at a very similar rate to what previous years were through 2022, maybe even further in 2024. So that was really good news. And then there's additional $20 million proposal through the Biden administration that could be additional funding. So that was definitely very good news, and kind of allows us a little bit more of breathing room before we have to make a decision for the 2022 budget. And just to briefly run through kind of what else we heard at that meeting. We kind of ran through the other partner contracts, the challenges both on the Metro side from kind of there. you know, that on their side, they don't know, you know, if folks are going to, if partners are going to stay in. You know, there's not really as much assurance on their side that, you know, they're not binding contracts multi-year. So, you know, we saw their challenges. We also saw kind of our challenges from a, you know, a lesser influence over the decision making, that sort of thing. And then they went through some mitigations that kind of would work through kind of lessening some of these challenges on both sides. So that was kind of the first one. We do have another meeting coming up here on the 22nd with them, and that'll be great to kind of work through specifically the municipal partners issues. So we have that, and then we did talk about holding 2 public meetings with residents and Metro staff to understand kind of what some of the recent changes meant to residents, what their current transit needs are, and then maybe some opportunities knowing that they're doing a system redesign. How might we get in front of that to understand kind of what residents need? And so we kind of, you know, laid out potentially 2 options, or 2 meeting options in March. I was thinking about potentially utilizing the TTC time slot on March 11th to hold that first meeting, and then following up the next week during the morning to kind of differentiate the time for folks. And then we'll also have an accompanying online map survey. We're kind of working through the details right now, but I think the intention is to kind of highlight trouble spots they have now, and the folks have now, and then request services, you know, where folks would like to see new services or increased frequency. And so I think that would be good to kind of complement the in-person specific challenges. And we do have, you know, we shot those times out to Metro staff, and they're gracious. Mick, the project manager leading the network redesign, and a service planner, all that works for them. So I wanted to kind of ask you guys if you're okay with sacrificing the next TTC time slot, and if these times worked for you, if you want to be there. So
Makes sense to me.
okay.
Yeah, I'd be good with that too. We've done that in the past too. So I think it'd be a good idea.
Okay. Awesome. And then just kind of real briefly, we did kind of initially, you know, when we thought we really had to make a decision by budget season, we did have 2 public meetings to kind of talk about a short list of transit options, April, May, and then coming up with some recommendations. We don't know if that, you know, depending upon what we hear in March, we might delay some of that, knowing that we have more time. But really, we'll check back in with you guys and kind of see where we're at and what folks need at that time, if that makes sense.
Andrew, Troy, is there any feedback on how the rapid bus effort is coming along? And the other part of that is there any, just a summary of the number of riders that the system is having per month since the pandemic began?
We didn't specifically hear anything about the BRT system in this last partner meeting. We do get monthly updates comparing last year, or 2019, 2020, and 2021 ridership numbers. So I can certainly share those with you guys if you're interested. But that's per route, so we can kind of just look at our routes if we're interested in that, and that gives the system total. So there's definitely that information if you're interested. I don't have it offhand right now.
One note about bus rapid transit is Metro did make it clear that because those current routes are totally within the city of Madison, that none of that cost is being passed along to partners. So the potential increase in costs that we're facing has nothing to do with bus rapid transit, which I think is an important thing to let people know. If someday down the line we wanted to look at BRT for Fitchburg, you know, Fish Hatchery or whatever that looks like, it'd be a whole different conversation and a cost conversation. I wouldn't have been for a while.
Yep, and thanks for reminding me. And I know that, you know, the East-West University corridor is that first one to go, and then, you know, from what you guys heard before, at similar like that, they'll you know, try it there first, and then based on their learned experience, they'll take that to the next ones. But I haven't heard anything about, you know, the Fish Hatchery Road, BRT option.
So A couple of comments from me. I think these dates are great. I think there's no reason why we shouldn't go ahead and just start doing public meetings. I would hope that we would stay open to the idea of having more of these later if the response is not to the level that we want. I do think that we should do our best to get what we consider to be a good baseline of knowledge. And if it doesn't happen through these first two opportunities, we should consider doing it again. On top of that, like I mentioned before, I think a really important way to advertise this would be to actually distribute a notice on the physical bus signs where people are actually going to stand for their bus. And I would be happy to work on that in terms of finding people to distribute them. But perhaps we could, Andrew, you and I, or somebody else on the committee, if anyone wants to, work on developing a flyer of some sort, printing it so that it can be distributed. I do think that would be really great and be a good opportunity for us to get more potential feedback than we might otherwise get. And then I guess the last thing I'll say is that I was able to sit in on the partner meeting, the Metro partner meeting, and I was really pleased to hear that there's more federal money coming in to keep budgets consistent going forward, potentially through 2023 or 2024. I think that that's really great because it gives us a longer runway on any sort of decision about what happens with the system, which I think is especially important with the fact that we're annexing part of the town of Madison come 2022, and changing our system in advance of that creates a further complication with that system. So anyway, I do think that the timeline has been a little bit relaxed on this, and we should go ahead and do as much as we can now so we have more information going forward. But I'm really happy that we probably won't have to make any decisions to do significant changes for the 2022 budget.
The Fitchburg Star for March, I'm guessing will come out maybe a day or two before that March 11th meeting. I'm not sure. My thought was that maybe, and I assume that they will be reaching out to you for some article or something, but I don't think it would hurt for you, for the city, to call Fitchburg Star and talk about this and see if they can do an article, a timely article about these meetings and what the whole process, what's going on. And it's just an opportunity to get some good coverage and some publicity through the newspaper.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill.
Any other questions or comments for Andrew on the transit schedule? If not, we'll move on to the next agenda item, is the County Highway Double M and McCoy public meeting debrief. And assume that Andrew will fill us in on that as well.
Yeah. All right. So hopefully you guys can see that. So we did get our draft comments in. We heard 15 folks attended the meeting. We had a number of emails kind of sent our way. In addition to that, so this kind of gives you a brief overview of what the proposed improvements are. So right now, the existing conditions is that McCoy here has a stop sign, so they have to kind of judge gaps and get out in traffic. I think you guys have seen this project before, so I won't go in too much detail, but the proposed improvements as they stand now with a 60% design show this side path that crosses a channelized right turn and then goes across County Highway MM and then continues over to the existing crossing. So right now the trail crossing crosses right here uncontrolled with no flashing lights or anything like that. So the impetus of this project was a safety improvement. We got HISSUP grant funding from WSDOT and the design consultant. We're making sure that we're addressing that safety concern, but at the same time, trying to control this trail crossing and make it more comfortable for cyclists. So we heard a number of comments specifically related to, zooming in. this channelized right turn and kind of how we're crossing cyclists. And so we're definitely trying to be cognizant. We want to make sure that people are comfortable and don't feel like they have to stop twice and it's not inconvenient to get across. So we're definitely looking at some signal timing improvements that could get people across the whole stretch without having to stop in the middle. And so we're looking at that. Similarly, that when this is a pedestrian walk signal, that this will be a red light, so no turn on red. So that will also improve the comfort for those cyclists and pedestrians walking there. So, that was most of what we heard. We did get some comments concerned about taking away this this climbing lane. We received one comment there. Right now, it's a climbing lane up the hill. We'd be converting that into a buffered bike lane. So that was one comment. And then, there was some, certainly some clarifying comments about, have you looked at flashing lights and that sort of thing? And we want to make sure that if folks are crossing this close to a signal, we would like them to cross at the signal. That's that offers the safest, most consistent with what drivers are expecting. And so that's kind of where we're at now. We're at 60%. We still have to iron out kind of how the signal is going to operate and a little bit more of the details, specifically by the crossing, like push button versus loop detection, that sort of thing, and how we're going to stage this. Right. It was originally scheduled to be constructed this year, but because of the highway improvements, we bumped it to next year so that we weren't conflicting with that. There will be a temporary signal there this year during those highway improvements, but they'll be taking that down before we start our project. So, that might be a little bit confusing to folks. And then we're kind of still working through what the sorts of detours would be if we did close this down during construction. So that's kind of a high level. I know, some of you guys were there, so feel free to jump in if I missed something, but we definitely got a lot of good comments and we're kind of working through, how to address those with the design. So any questions?
Andrew, this is Troy. Does the ADA cover this type of situation where someone, let's take a worst case example, is in a wheelchair and needs to cross that? Is there any requirements that they either have a way to provide extra timing or, maybe pushing a button or, so that they can have like an extra 20 seconds or whatever to get across that road at whatever speed a typical wheelchair might go at? Right.
That's a great point. So we would typically be timing this for, the 3.5 feet per second. And so that would mean that a person could feasibly cross from here to here in the allotted do not walk time, plus the 7 seconds of walk time. So we are not anticipating, sometimes you might see signals be designed so that you have to cross twice so that you would only have enough time to cross, this and then cross to here. We're definitely not doing that. In fact, we're looking at timing it so that, someone in a wheelchair could certainly get across from here to here, and potentially somebody in a bike could get across this whole intersection. So, we're still kind of massaging the time to see how much we have and what that's going to mean. But yeah, certainly ADA signal timing does apply here, and we're making sure that we're timing it so that folks in a wheelchair and folks walking slower can get across the whole intersection safely. And I'll note that we also do plan to put push buttons out here just in case somebody gets stuck out there. They'll be able to push it and still get that actuation. So, great question.
Yeah, I can say personally, that's a really welcome addition. That road is getting harder and harder to cross by bicycle as the traffic has really picked up the last few years. It's kind of a similar intersection to PD and Fish Hatchery, where you have, if you're going across the end of PD along the west side of Fish Hatchery, you've got across a small, ramp crossing, kind of like right turn crossing, then you've got the main road. And that signal gives you just enough time to get across. Not a lot, but so I would assume the timing's probably going to have to be the the same on that, or at least as much as that intersection.
And Andrew, you might not know this off the top of my head, but just for people that are interested, the funding of this, the actual construction of the intersection, I believe, is being covered almost entirely or mostly by the county and the state of Wisconsin. But Fitchburg is contributing to the design cost. Do you know that off the top of your head?
Typically HISIP projects are 90-10 split for construction. I believe that the county and Fitchburg are covering all the design costs. I think we have a 1/3, 2/3 split. And so that also plays into that 10% of construction costs. So, yeah, so you're right. Yeah, definitely the overall majority covered by WSDOT and the county.
Any other questions or comments for Andrew on the proposed intersection improvements? If not, the next agenda item is a report from the department. Do you have more news for us, Andrew?
You guys are gonna get sick of hearing me. Sorry. We have a few things. So, we do. I'll kind of note in the announcements, we'll have some public meetings coming up. So certainly stay tuned for those. We do, we have 2 times a year that we could apply to, similar to this project, HISIP funding for safety improvements. We've kind of outlined potentially some trail crossings that we could kind of collectively apply for throughout the city. So we'll be talking with you guys in the coming months. Unfortunately, we couldn't get everything together for this February submittal, but we will be applying in August. All things, working out. So look forward to that. And also Kane and County Highway M, we'll be talking to the county about that. That's another potential location where we'll be looking for a new project. So that's definitely exciting. And then, I think those are the big things. And then I'll wait for the other 2 public meetings till a little bit later.
Okay, the next agenda item is announcements, and the first one under that is you had already explained for the March meeting that we may have a public meeting for input on Madison Metro changes and improvements. So I assume we'll wait to hear on that if that can be arranged.
Yep.
And then the Lacey Road Fitchburg to Seminole public meeting is coming up February 17th.
Yeah. So I'll just share my screen briefly.
Okay.
So 2 projects coming up. One is Cyene. And so I don't know if you guys have talked about this one yet before. Currently where we're at is we have some cross sections and some intersection alternatives laid out for the major intersections, Lacey, Sherrill, Nine Bark, and McCoy and Cyene. And so we'll be presenting those on the 25th from 6:30 to 8. And if you go to the website, you can click on that registration link and it's there. Also, we will, also in here is the Lacey Road, Fitch-Rona to Seminole. And so that is coming up next Wednesday. And so this is kind of a 2-parter. The main project is a T grant from WSDOT and in partnership with Promega. That is this roadway project. So we'll be reconstructing Lacey Road, not quite to Fitch-Rona Road, about 200 feet east of Fitch-Rona and about, 300 feet west of the Badger State Trail. And so that'll go to curb and gutter, to bike lanes on both sides, in our current cross section that we'll be presenting, and medians in the middle. So certainly, and some wastewater improvements and some lighting improvements. So certainly looking forward to kind of working with the public, hearing feedback on that from you and members of the public. And then we also have kind of separate but potentially concurrent construction for next year at the intersection of Seminole and Lacey. We're looking at either a roundabout there or a traffic signal. And so we'll be presenting those options and kind of weighing the pros and cons there. And so that'll kind of be, two separate projects, but kind of potentially constructed at once. And certainly it makes sense to do this all at once and get it all improved at the same time. So that project is going to be, or that public meeting is next Wednesday from 5:30 to 7. And the links there. So that's it.
Just a quick question for the public meeting on the 17th. You're not looking at feedback for a roundabout or a traffic light at that meeting, just the initial road improvement?
We will be, yeah. I think, yeah, we'll be kind of doing both. So we're kind of billing this as one project together, kind of externally from, Fitchburg to Seminole, and then that includes the intersection improvements at Seminole and Lacey. So, yep, we will be talking about
some feedback about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Andrew, Troy, it'd be nice to have feedback at that meeting as to how the roundabout that was constructed a couple of years ago is going. I mean, last year, actually. Well, what is 2 years? Anyways, the roundabout there on the west side of the city that was constructed. How that's, how the police view it, and, that type of information might be very helpful for this type of meeting.
Yeah, that's helpful. And we certainly hope, like what we did with McCoy, to get the public feedback, bring it back to you guys, and kind of check in and see if you have any additional comments. And we're definitely happy if you guys can make it too, so appreciate it.
Any other announcements from anyone? If not, would someone like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So move.
I make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Meeting is adjourned.